Hello, welcome to this Watch Me Work. I am in the process of finishing the commercial that I'm working on for my book. Now, I've recorded this about 3 times, and every time I've found something very useful out, and that's the reason why I've recorded it again and again and again. I'll get to that in a minute, why I've recorded it umpteen times. There's a very specific reason and a very interesting reason, but I'll just explain the shot. This is the very end, so it's like party time. All the characters that have sort of come to be have sort of congregated at the very end, and they're hanging out and having a nice time. Most of it is going to be, well, some of it is going to be reuse. I'm going to try and reuse as much of the cats stuff as possible because they do take quite a long time to animate. So if I can just sort of get them in, then that's best. I've got to mask little bits of Bus Stop out for when he sort of pokes his head from behind the book and things like that. But generally he's fairly straightforward. Bits of animation where the characters have jumped in, I've sort of kept bits of it, and then I'll just have to rejig it so that they sort of like the sailor, he'll have to jump in from, you know, screen left. The same from the boy, he might pop up from the back there. You'll notice it's interesting actually if I, oh no, here we are. Yeah, sometimes I was just looking at the boy's hands. Oh, there we go. It's just a rendering issue. His hands are a bit different to a lot of the other characters' hands, and it looks like something is turned on. Yeah, there you go. Just turn that off. I was wondering why his hands weren't visible in some of the shots, in some of the frames. Haven't got anything for the dog at all as far as I know, so he's going to have to be animated entirely fresh. And then this shot runs from the previous shot where the green bird flies in from out of shot, and this is why I've been recording it 3 times. The first time I recorded this, I hand animated. You see this sort of blue swoosh that's going on here. That's not actually going to be in the shot at all. It's just a guide for me to kind of follow. And the bird is going to go whoosh like that and then sort of faff about at the end place and just look delighted. If I just show you a bit more. So he's got to come out from screen and do all of that. Now originally I animated him by hand every frame, and it worked a bit, but it was a bit crude, and it isn't really the way that you're supposed to do this sort of stuff. What you're supposed to really use for this kind of shot is something called a 3D path. Now it doesn't have to be 3D. This is what's so frustratingly weird about the terminology. It's not actually a 3D path at all, unless you want it to be. It can be a 3D path, but it's called a 3D path regardless of whether it is 3D or not. Very confusing. It's harmony at its finest. Well done fellas. But it is really good. And one of the things I did like about it was that it allows you to create a very smooth, gentle path where the character slides around and does its thing. Now, first of all, I hadn't really used paths much in my entire career. It's something that you mainly use for vehicles, leaves, birds, that sort of stuff, and it didn't really come up much, so most of the time you just don't touch it. But for stuff like this, it really is a helpful thing. The only problem was that I hadn't used it very much, so there were certain things about it that I had to kind of learn on the fly, which I'll go over in a minute because I think it's very important that other people know about how this really works. And the other thing is there was no way for characters to follow a path in terms of their rotation. So normally when you have a character on a path, it would always face exactly the same way as it started and it ended. So bouncing balls and things like that's fine because you don't see a rotation. But if you've got a leaf or a bird, you want the head to be always at the forefront of that curve. And there didn't seem to be any official way of doing that kind of work. So I figured it out, basically. I figured out a way to make it work. And I think it'll only apply to Harmony 22 onwards, I think, because it does use something called a retime. No, what's it called? A retime node? Anyway, we shall see. Now, as you can see here, I've managed to make it work. Now I'm just going to turn off. I'm going to animate this whole scene character for character, because there's no way there's no point in animating all of it at once. It's ridiculous. It's not stop motion, it doesn't have to do that. So I'm just going to turn off the cats, and I'm going to turn off the boy and the dog and the sailor as well. So we've just got the book and the path and the bird. And this little thing here I created as well, because whenever you create a path in Harmony, there are times when you don't want it to follow a path. You say, okay, I've done with following the path. I now want it to just sort of animate as normal. And normally that's fine, but with this technique that I developed, I had to create a method where I had to turn that off and on mid animation. So you'll see what I mean. So I'll play you back what I've managed to create. And this is the bird flying in from close up. Let me just do that. There we go. Now I may adjust this later, because I still think when he comes in, it's a little bit too fast. But you can see him following that path correctly, and it makes sense. Obviously he's not flapping yet, he hasn't got any actual character yet, but in terms of his main basis, that's a nice movement, and it's happily achieved reasonably easily. I mean, there's still quite a lot of creativity involved of trying to fiddle around with the path and stuff and getting the timing right, which I will go over in a minute. But if we look at the path, you select the path. I will go into all of this in a minute, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you hanging. And select show controls. We can see the path that he follows, or she follows, whatever green bird is, and the little tick marks of the frames that correspond with where it goes. So if I rewind here, he follows, or she follows the path perfectly, you know, and even the orientation follows the path perfectly as well, which is a bit of a thing. You have to fiddle around with the positions, and if I look at the top view, this actually does move in full 3 dimensions. So the beginning part of this, the character is very close to the camera. If we look at the camera cone, the character starts off, we can just about see it with this little sort of black line here. It's very close to the camera, and then it goes away, and then it comes forwards again and then back. So the good thing about this is that it does automatically get behind and in front of the book without any effort. It's just doing that in real life. The book is on this line here. So as soon as the character goes in front of that, you know, we're fine. We're not having to animate sort of shifting it backwards and forwards in Z in any kind of artificial way. Now you'll notice when I click over, now there's a reason why I made the scene, I think, what is it, 41 frames long. I mean, it will be longer than this, but when it gets to 42, the character does that and stays there, and that's because the the path is still dictating how the orientation goes for a few frames after that movement has stopped. And I think, no, I haven't actually set the path to toggle off yet, but that's something that we will do. But the point is that I have to have this switch to turn off this ability, otherwise the character just sort of goes at the end, and it's totally unhelpful. So you know, or it does some weird stuff that you can't really control. So you have to have the ability to turn the path off, and I shall go into it now. So the point is, I've spent 3 recordings to get this right, and it was something that I didn't think I'd have to do, because I was under the impression that, first of all, paths were easy, which they are, but there are other fiddling things that you need to figure out. And then also this orientation thing, which just doesn't exist. So I had to develop one. Which luckily I was able to figure out, and I'll make one. I will make one fresh now. So I'm going to create a new scene and show the 3D follow. There we go. Now I'm just going to make this big and get rid of this drawing, and just go into the node view and get rid of the right node as well. Create a new drawing and call it shape. There we go. So this is the shape, and this is its peg, and I will take that out of the equation for now because that could get in the way, and then I'm going to create another peg for it and call this path. All right. So it's very important. First of all, let's create this shape. And it wouldn't be a bad idea if I put the grid on in some form. Let me just... sorry, my pencil's doing some weird stuff. There we go. Putting the grid on there gives me the exact center, and just for an ease of use basis, it's handy to know the exact center for what I'm about to do. So I'm just going to create this. Let's get rid of all of these. What do you mean? Yes, go away. Not used by anything. Right, okay. So I'm going to create a circle, and I'm going to create... At the moment, I'm just going to create a circle because this sort of illustrates the issues that you run into. I'm going to get rid of the grid now, don't need it. Me tidying as I go. Right, now then, in order to create a path, you have to set it by default. If you're, if you've set your preferences correctly, by default they're on separate. So if I move that up, all these values change automatically, and it's largely moved in Y there. X tiny little bit because I shifted it around. If I hold down shift while I do it, only Y has a value and none of the others do. If I were to move it in Z, blah 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 blah, you get the idea. Now if I switch it over to 3D path, it changes entirely. You still have X, Y and Z values, but you also have this velocity value here. And just the whole layout is different, and you can't do a kind of function connection between them. You have this connected thing, which I've never used, but it works in a very different way to how separate works, which makes... Separate is more logical and makes more sense, and 3D path is very strange initially because it does work in a very different way, but it will make sense to you. Now, I have the option in 3D path whether I actually want to make it 3D or not. If you do make it 3D, then you have a lot more, many more options of scale and all of this nonsense. For this example, I'm not going to do a 3D path that is 3D. What they should have done is just got rid of this bit. Then it's path and separate. That makes far more sense, but harmony, there you go. Right. It must be set to 3D path for this to work. Do not, for any path to make, it'll work until a certain bit in this lecture that I'm giving. Do not give this peg a pivot. Just always make sure it's 0 for this to work, this following thing. It will work if you give it a pivot until a certain point. So don't give it a pivot. Right. We are ready to start. Now what I'm going to do is move the path to the first position, which is going to be over here, and that's on frame 1. I'm going to go on to frame 50, move it over here, and that's now given us our 2 positions. Now in between them, I'm going to make it a motion tween, and we can see, acts in the usual way. Now this is the thing that paths do that separate doesn't do. If I select the path and then hit show controls, we now see this, which we don't get on any other form of peg. It's just the 3D path that could do this. And we've got a visual representation of where the thing is going to be over time. Tick, 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 tick. You can see it's a certain amount of frames, and they're even at the moment. Now, I want to keep keyframe 1 and keyframe 2 exactly as that. I don't want to add more keyframes. I can do, if I want to do that, I can do that. And the reason why we're getting this long line here is because we haven't hit that. And then once we do, we get this. So we can change the path in this way. However, that's not what I want to do. I want the timing of this to be just between this and this. So how do you create the curves? You do this. Let's undo it back to how we were. Let's go back to the first frame. Hover your mouse cursor or stylus cursor over the right bit, and then tap P on the keyboard, and you get this magenta dot. Do it again here, P, and what that does is it just changes the path. It's not changing the timing, or it's not adding any keyframes. It's just saying, I now want the path to be this shape. That's all it's doing. And now if I play it back, it follows this path, still at very even rate. Now, to get the timing different, we have to go select the path, and we have to really use the function viewer for this. And we get 4 different values. Now, the function viewer, I'm not going to lie, is a bit of a pain in the neck. And it's not really as well designed as some of the other stuff in the program, unfortunately. I wish it was, but it isn't. However, if you know certain things, it can calm the experience down. And one of the things you must do when you're using the function viewer is not show everything, because it'll just overwhelm you and frighten you. So if we look here, these are all the ones that are being shown. All we want is the velocity, because we don't want to change the path. If I change these, you'll notice that the curves change, because it's the accumulation of the x, y, less so z, because that's just a constant all the way through. We're not moving it in z yet. But if I move this around, the x and y values change. We don't care about that. We can do that here much more creatively. Here it's just confusing. So turn all of these off. So now we're just seeing the velocity curve. And just for ease of use, I'm going to double tap the color and change it to a kind of yellow orange. And then that's a bit easier to see here. In fact, I might do it on much more bright orange, yellow. There we go. That's much easier to see. Now, in order for this curve to actually mean anything, let's just select this. And then if you get situations where it's all over here and stuff and you can't see it, just tap those and you will always get back to seeing what you need to see. It's just one of those things. Always make sure that's turned on, because that's useful, and then just tap these and it kind of resets the view for what you're currently looking at, which is the path velocity. Now, the velocity, this 0 to 1, and this is only how the velocity works. This is the entirety of the journey that path takes. Starts at 0 and ends at 100%. It's a percentage, basically. And a reason, if you look at it, it's an even speed, and of course this is an even speed. It's just a completely straight line. Now what we'd like to do, for example, is slow it down here and then have it whoosh down there as if it's like a roller coaster. So, you know. So obviously these little bits have to be quite close to each other. Now, if I slide along here, we can get to the relevant frame. So around this point on the chart, we want hardly any movement to happen, because this is where it's going to slow down. So hardly any movement is, if we're talking about a journey from 0 to 100, we want it to kind of plateau. So what I can do is select that. I don't know what's happened here, excuse me. Yeah, there we go. I've got path X selected for some reason, sorry. I don't want that. I will turn it off. There we go. Right, so we've just got the yellow. I don't know what happened there. I'm just going to move it over to around there, so we kind of know where we're going to be. Now I'm going to select that. So it goes back anyway. And then I'm going to move that lever up and then move this lever down so that we kind of get a plateau at the relevant bit. Now at the moment the plateau is happening here. It's not quite right. So I need to sort of shift this until I'm looking here all the time to try and get the plateau happening at the place I want it to happen. Now it is a bit fiddly, this. There we go. That's more like it. So it'll go, you know, and I can speed this bit up by doing this. So you can see at the end, and the further down I pull that and sort of pull it around, we're getting now a very dense plateau here. If I move that over, there's a lot of trial and error in this, I'm not going to lie. There we go. It's a bit too bunched together. Now what we could do, we could add a point here. I could add a key here if I wanted to. However, it's best to keep as few points on a velocity chart as possible. 2 is your absolute goal. But if you absolutely have to, you can put them in, but it does tend to make things look a bit strange. You want to try and keep a nice smooth curve, otherwise it just looks wrong. There's often a bit of juddering. So anyway, if I play this back now, there we go, see? Yeah, and we can change the function by going here and just selecting it and fiddling about again. It's not set in stone. I really wish that these handles were chunkier, because they are a bit thin and small. And I keep accidentally not touching them when I'm trying to maneuver things around. There we go. I'd say that's more like it, I'd say. Still, now I would say that it wasn't fast enough at the end, so that looks more like it. Yeah, there we go. So you get the idea. It's all about the velocity, and I can change this if I want to. I can change the path. It's not just use that. I can move the magenta things around so that the timing's still maintained, and it does that instead. So it does make it a lot more versatile to move things around. And of course I can move things around in, you know, Z if I wish to, by selecting 3D, and then I now can move things in Z if I want to. So if I wanted to move that, I could then do that as well. So it should mean that the dot gets you can see it getting smaller there. I can do it a bit more. It tends to stop playback a little bit if I keep the top view visible, so I'm just going to turn that off, and you can see it now getting smaller and then big again because it's moving away from the camera. There we are. That's the general principle. Now I'm going to just undo a few steps so that everything's back to normal, and I don't want it 3D at all. So we're just dealing with what we had to start with. There we go. Lovely. Now, this is the bit where things get more interesting. Let me turn off all of that. Now, supposing I have a shape that actually has a point to it. There we are. So now we've got a sort of direction it follows. And this is the bit that I was frustrated by, is that I couldn't make the thing follow the path with any node that I could find. It just didn't exist. And I did check on Toon Boom's website, and there didn't seem to be anything coming up for that. So it pretty much meant that the animator would have to hand animate the orientation to get it right, which seems like an awful lot of work for something as basic as that should kind of be built in, really. So what I did was this, and I'll show you the brain behind it. So the first thing is I thought, well, constraints allow for orientation between two pegs. So a 2-point constraint can use two pegs to twist a character around. So I knew I'd have one of these, and I'll just make sure that project to plane or ignore 3D transform selected, otherwise you get 3D stuff. And I'm going to just leave that for now. I also knew that I would need something called, not a limit, what do I want? A retiming. Now this is a node that I think has only been around since Harmony 22, so you wouldn't have been able to do this very early, but now you can. And what this allows you to do, and the values actually are absolutely correct, except I want it to be a frame offset instead of a target frame. And what this will do is it will say, I want exactly the same position. You can see it just in green there. I want the exact same position of this, but one frame previous. And by doing that, you've given it a direction to follow. See what I mean? It gives, you need a trajectory of 2 points for it to sort of orient, you know? So I'm going to plug that in like that. So now we've essentially got one here and then one. Now I can't remember if it's before or after. I think it's back, but I can't remember. You can change it to -1, which is forwards, and backwards, you know, it's all this sort of stuff. But the path dot, which is what this is, has another equivalent, which is one frame behind, and it gives you that. Anyway, now the logic of this should be, you plug that in there, just do that for neatness, you plug that in there, and you plug that into there. So you've got your orientation. If I select this and just say show controls, you can see the two dots doing their thing, especially when it's further apart. But the problem is that the egg thing is still not twisting to the correct position. I'm thinking, oh, what is it that I'm doing wrong? Because this logically is correct, that this is a constraint that 2 points should then twist it into the right location. So first of all, you don't want that. You don't want any of that or that. You do want this, and I've set it by default to 300. And I think we want a skew modifier as well to set to 100. Now skew is very important because that does aid the rotation of this object. But if I still use those things, we're still not getting a result. It doesn't do anything. And that is where I thought, well, what if it doesn't read where this is because the pivot is in its mind the same? So what I did was I created a peg. Now this is thinking outside the box, and I put it here, and all I did, I'd say adjust, what did I call it? Pivot adjust. And all I did was shifted the pivot over ever so slightly in both directions. Now, it kind of worked. However, as you see, you're getting a lot of distortion suddenly now, but it is at least kind of following the path, which is what we want. So now I thought, oh, well, maybe, okay, some of the information I want, but not all of it. Basically, I just want the rotation. So what do you do with that? You put a limit in. And I say, I want some of this, and I want all of this. And I say 0 to everything except rotation. Turn off flipping. And I can't remember whether I have optimized or ignore here, but we'll find out in a minute. And then it works. The only issue at the moment is that, of course, it's twisted the wrong place. So you'll notice the first frame, it's where we want it. And then the second frame, it isn't, but it does stay in that rotation. So this is where now you have this take shape. This is now where you rotate the object and say, this is where I want it to face. So if I do that with this peg, it now follows pretty much the route. Now there's a little bit of a twist there, and I think it might be something to do with this. So applied as, it's something like that. So we'll figure it out together. There we go. Now there is a certain amount of trial and error here. Let me just try and see if I can get this right. Sometimes this is too much or too little. If I turn it off, let's have 3 there, 1 there. Can't remember if it's, if I turn that off, that's no good. And if I have 1, that might work. That's not bad. It's still not really rotating enough for me. Anyway, that's actually not the right way around. So I'm selecting the shape. Oh, there you go, that's it. Now, if I have it at 50, I think it's all about blending values at this point. And I think distance max 200. Yeah, I think that's it. So I think smoothing, I might be able to do that. There we go. I think that's all right, and then it's just a case of altering the path itself, which I will do in a minute. But there you go. We've now got something that's moving correctly. The only weird bit, of course, is that at the end, but that's the reason why I put a switch in, which I will go over in a minute. So let's, for now, so that I don't get distracted by that bit, I'm just going to hide that. So we only see that. And just because you notice here, it's sort of, it doesn't really get correct until it gets to that point. So I'm just going to move that there. There we go. So that is the orientation we want. And then it's very nice. There we are. Good. So let me just see. Now, it's interesting that I still don't think that's good enough. What I want is for it to be like that. And maybe if there was more of a position, I think it's because the elasticity of this, let me just see, maybe that's what I want. Better. Try 400. That's better. I could try 500. There we go. This is the only value really that you need to change once you've got the skew modifier down. I don't think smoothing does anything, does it? It does a little bit. Yeah, I think that's better. There we go. So we've got our little setup, but there's weird stuff like when it gets to there, it sort of turns very abruptly. So what you need to do is even out the curve. Now this is something which you need to know anyway. So if we get to, if I select that dot actually, if you go to chord and control points, which you have to enable, and it would be there we go. If you can put that on any of these screens, of course, you've got the ability to change the tension, the continuity and the bias of said point, really. And this is a bit, this requires just trial and error all the time. Now, the ones you're mainly concerned with are tension and bias. The continuity I'd leave alone because I'll show you what each one does. So tension, if we're looking at this point, increases the sort of tightness of the curve, or if I do -1 here, it loosens it up. Bias sort of shifts the center point over to one side or to not. So again, that's quite useful. I would say probably 2 there and -6 there, maybe not so much. 0, maybe it is a bias thing. Anyway, we'll figure it out. Continuity, if I do that, does this kind of pinch point between them, or sort of, if I do it the other way, that. I mean, it's good if you're wanting a rectangle, but you know what I mean. It's not, for most curves, it would be just annoying, so I'd leave it. So that's what you have to keep fiddling with until you're happy with the result. And I think half the problem here is that the timing is now happening too quickly at that point. We need to shift the timing over. But I think altering the bias has helped a little bit. So again, we're going to function, we're going to path, turn off these, and then we just make some alterations so that the tick, 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 the close stuff is happening more here. And I think that's it. Let's see. Okay, so it is, but it's still turning a little bit too quickly. Now there's one other option that we can employ here, apart from fiddling around with the points, is we can, sorry, it's here. We can change the value from 1 to 2 or 3 or whatever. And what that does, if I show you what's going on, oh, you can see actually. If I zoom in a bit. The retime transformation before was happening literally the frame, what one are we on at the moment? You can see there's a gap between them because I've set it to 2. If I set it to 3, there'll be a bigger gap. 4, bigger gap still. And what we want is to sort of capture the essence of the curve, really. The bigger the gap, it changes how quickly it'll do the turn. So the bigger the gap, the less turning it'll do. But sometimes you'll get that sort of, we're now getting a sort of, you know, the bigger the gap, we're sort of, it's happening a bit too, I mean, that actually does a better job of that, but it might do a very good job of later on. It works very, big amounts work very well when there's a small, you know, tick, 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 but works very badly when things get very wide because it thinks that's the orientation there. And of course it isn't, it's that. So we have a choice of either saying this is always 1, which I prefer really because fiddling around with that tends to not really work out very well. Or you can sort of change that value over time using a slider or something like that. personally, I prefer to just leave it at 1 and then just try and work out why this curve is, you know, not working out. So let me just select that, and again, change the tension to like 0.5. No, sorry, minus 0.5. Let's see what happens. That's a gentler curve, isn't it, I think? And then I can just change the bias so that it happens more over there, I think. You see what I mean? Now, I don't know what happened there. That's interesting. How odd. 4 point, oh, yes, all right. There we go. How unusual. Wonder why. Let me try 3. There we go. You do have to keep an eye on these things because they do. I mean, I really wish you could get hold of that and just sort of move a lever around, quite honestly, but you can't. So you have to do this tension bias thing, which isn't ideal, I have to say, but there we go. Now, why is that doing that? I mean, if I change this so that it's a weak tension, we might get something a bit more. I don't think I want it quite so weak as that. I'd say 0.5 here. Still doing that. So it's definitely this that's causing the problem. 4, 5. It's odd, isn't it? 3. It's the bias, I think. 4 and 2. No. It could be. Oh, hang on. Allow flipping. I don't want that. Allow flip on X. That could be that. Ignored. Applied. No, I don't think it is anything like that. Is it there? It's interesting, you know. No, it's 50-50. What about, no, translate, transform, No, it's nothing there unless it's something here. No, 500. I don't know. Could be the speed. But it was definitely something that worked previously, and then suddenly, I just checked the rendering, yeah, it's doing it. Sometimes it can be an OpenGL thing. As I say, because I'm having to go through all this confusion, sometimes it does misbehave. What if I do that? Does it calm it down? It's something to do with how it's interpreting the path. So if I change that to 0.2, that's better. I think in its internal figurings out, it was just a bit too tight between those two things, so it was sort of working out that it wasn't working. But now you can see that curve is a lot more gentle. So it is to do with the tightening and stuff. I would leave this alone because it just causes more trouble than it's worth fiddling around with those values, and just try to get in there and tighten and loosen the curve until you're happy. That, whatever you do, regardless of whether you use this or not, is the thing that makes or breaks curves, to make them look nice, and it does take time to do. But now you can see that actually works really well. And I've got another little thing that I do. So as I said before, I've got this, I need to have the ability to turn off the grid. So if I move it over to 60, you'll see at the end that, actually I'm not sure if I do need it after all. Do you know what? I'm not sure I need it after all. Originally when I created this, because the, yeah, I don't think I need it now. When I originally created this, I had quite a high value here. And as a consequence, the animation, because it was still doing its thing, you'll see what I mean if I do like 5, it had 5 frames to go. See what I mean? It's like, you know, hadn't really figured out yet how many more it had to go. So I had to sort of turn that off once it had stopped doing its path. But now I'm having it at frame 1. Don't need that, because it's the next frame, you know, which you would automatically sort of position yourself manually. So that's handy. Oh, right, okay, don't need that. Even I've learned something with this tutorial. So it's made it a lot easier. So there you go. This is what I've developed for the shot that I'm working on. Now, because I've been rambling on, but it is, I would argue it's rather useful. I'm going to keep this just a technical thing, because I think this would be more interesting for people to just have a technical explanation rather than, and now I'm going to animate it. But that's how I'm going to do the bird. I've already done it. I can take out the lever bit, which I didn't know I could do, but that's how it works, and it works really well. I'm ever so pleased with it, because it means that I can package it up and use it for future use. It's this, you know, I group it up together. There we go. Get rid of that, and essentially I've got something that can be reused again and again. The only thing that you might need to alter is the distance max, because I think depending on the wideness of the shot and the amount of space that the path takes up, you need to increase or decrease this distance max. Basically, it's a reference on how much it hugs the line. If I increase it to something ridiculous like 2000, it's sort of a bit delayed now. Well, I don't know though, it's not bad, is it? Maybe. See, if I have it at 0, it's sort of not right. And if I have it at 1, it's completely wrong. So you have to sort of figure out a number where it still works, and you might even need to sort of change that over the course of a shot. You know what I mean? If you want that curve happening more like that. In fact, 300 might work quite well. Yeah, there you go. I think 300's better. So, because I think I had that at 300 to start with. If I've got the skew modifier on, maybe I don't need that now. Let's just have a look and see how much that affects things. A little bit, yeah. If I turn it off entirely, I think you need at least 1 on the skew modifier, and then it works. Because what we're doing is we're transferring skew information back into rotation, and it seems to work. Don't ask me why, but I kind of know that the relationship, particularly with constraints, has a rule that if it doesn't work, it's usually skew that's the problem. And what you need to do is still enable it, but convert it into rotational information, which is what's going on here. Rotation on, skew off, and then skew applied as rotation, and then it seems to sort of figure out what you actually want. It's as simple as that. If I change it to 50, we're getting a more even spread of that information, you see, and it tends to follow the middle part all the way through. So that's my rationale there. So I kept it at 50, had a distance of 300, which is a changeable thing, and then you can do your thing there. So I hope this has been interesting. It's a little bit dry for one of these watch me work things, but nerdily it's quite interesting for me, and also it'll be useful for you, because there are many times when you do need to do this sort of stuff. Leaves falling down, birds flying around, you know, Tinkerbell flying around. I don't know, it would just be something that you need the path to follow. This is what does that. Hello again. Just before I finish this video, there's a little addendum. I've tinkered with the settings and I made it even better. So in the constraints, the 2-point constraints thing here, I've changed the distance max. As I said before, this is a thing that you can sort of alter to taste depending on the size of the screen. For this shot, I've got it at 200, but I've gotten rid of the skew modifier entirely, gotten rid of it. And in here, in the transformation limit, ignore these grayed out bits, I've said to apply as rotation. I can't remember if that was the case before, but anyway, I've had it applied as rotation, but no skew modifying coming through. And for some reason, it seems to work much better. For whatever you do, there's always a certain amount of fiddling around and, you know, trial and error and all of this sort of stuff. But now we've got, I'm really pleased with how that's looking. There will be a little bit of retiming that I've got to do, and maybe positioning him down here. I might do that now actually. There we go, it's a bit nicer. So there's still a little bit of finessing to do, but this is now such an easy way to get a character doing something quite complicated, not just over 2 dimensions, but 3 dimensions as well. So I'm very happy with how this has worked. Right, now I'm going to say ta-ta. Ta-ta!